Man, y'all knew I was gonna come back for Zato.
Wait a minute.
Zato is a Pokemon trainer that took matters into his own hands and jumps his opponents with his Pokemon. And to be honest, sometimes watching a Zato cook is like being black watching a horror movie. All you can do sometimes is sit back and be like, man, that's just not fair. So that brings me to my next point. How does it all work? Meet Eddie, aka Funny Shadow Man. Together they are known as a puppet character because they consist of two characters being controlled at once. Zato and Eddie achieved this by using a mechanic called negative edge. Negative edge is just a fancy way of saying that when you press a button, Zato does something, and when you release that button, Eddie does something. So in flow of actually playing the character, you're going to be holding down buttons and releasing them at different times to control both characters at the same time, seamlessly. If the Eddie gauge runs out or Eddie gets hit by your opponent's attack, Eddie is going to be down until the gauge comes back.
Are you an expert? I want to test you. Whatever test you like.
Controlling two movesets at once allows for ridiculous creativity and seemingly infinite combinations to break ankles and leave your opponent dumbfounded. When you're new to Zato, the amount of options you have can look and feel complicated to do, and because of that, it often gets compared to playing a piano. The goal of this video is to help you give up that Stevie Wonder impression and change how you see playing Zato forever, and think of playing him like the hooper he really is. Come on, man, you know we do guys differently over here. Because of this, we're gonna call today's video Zato's Hoop Mixtape, guys. Before we get into it, if you guys are enjoying the video at all, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. I really appreciate it and it helps me a lot. At the core of Zato and Eddie's game plan is what I like to call fast break offense, or the drive. The best way to describe the drive is Zato and Eddie will take turns passing the opponent between each other with the goal of getting them to the end of the stage, which what I will call the basketball goal. Because Zato is such a freeform character like we talked about, there's a bunch of different ways of how to do it. But what makes a drive is the fact that it's a lockdown pressure and it pushes them across the stage to the corner. The skill level of the drive that you use isn't what's important. What's important is that you can consistently do it and that you can establish to your opponent in your match that you have one. Having a drive is essential when it comes to playing Zato because it's what opens up other options for you. Now that you know what the drive is, let's talk about how to successfully start one. Heavy slash into pierce or down forward square or punch is going to be the easiest way or the safest way to start your fast break. So when you're up close and you want to start a fast break, make sure you gatling your slashes into a heavy slash before you go into pierce. What makes this so good is it's what we call a frame trap, which basically means that if your person or your opponent tries to press an attack in between, they're going to get hit and you get a combo for it. An important note is if you try to cancel into pierce off of something other than heavy slash, you don't have enough advantage and your Eddie will get hit before the move comes out. Now in situations where you're too far for your heavy slash to reach, those are times when you probably want to use your 2 slash. Now when your 2 slash makes contact, when people are scared or afraid of your lockdown offense, they're going to jump. So a good way of starting your fast break in this situation is to use 2S into leap. I prefer to use leap rather than pierce in this situation most of the time because of the fact that I don't have the risk of Eddie getting hit because it's not guaranteed like it is with heavy slash. And it's also the fact that leap gives me plenty of time to run up to continue pressure afterward. Now that you've proven to your opponent that you can consistently drive them to the basket using heavy slash into pierce, they now have to respect your option by not pressing any buttons. And because they are respecting you now, you have the option of going for more risky but also more rewarding mix-ups. Specifically in this case, our opponent respecting our drive allows us to now cancel the first hit of pierce into drills, which is going to give us way more time for a deadly mix-up. And this is where a lot of players make a mistake, where they go for greedy mix-ups before they establish the fact that they could drive on their opponent. Another way of thinking about this in basketball terms is, why would I be scared of your left hand if you haven't proven to me that you can take me with your right hand? It's the threat of the initial drive that allows for the crossover to work, because you can't guard both things. So in situations where people can handle the mix from your initial drive pretty well, so they can handle the overhead at the end of your drive, or the low at the end of your drive, or the throw at the end of your drive, then that's when it's time to go ahead and try to sneak in a greedy option, such as canceling into these drills. Spacing can also make it very good or hard for your opponent to deal with, because if you space a pierce properly, you may be able to cancel into drills without even being in danger. Another greedy option you have when your opponent is being too patient and respecting your options is going into sandwich pressure using drunkard shade. Once you have 80 in this position, if you think your opponent's going to jump, you can quickly just tap slash. If you think your opponent's going to stay and take the pressure, you can either go for punch or kick. If you go for punch, which is going to give you pierce, make sure you cover it with punch from Zato. Do not use any other button there, because Zato can be interrupted and it will injure pressure. The biggest tip to give you here is, do not spam the punch button with Zato when starting sandwich pressure. Press the punch button only one time, because if you don't, you can mess up the conversion. Drills after using drunkard shade is a great opportunity to experiment with flight also, as it gives you the chance for either doing a high or a low. Now that we talked about drives and introduced sandwich pressure, now it's time to complete our understanding of Zato's kit by talking about those buttons we talked about earlier, where we could not go into a fast break from heavy slash. So with Zato, you're going to be using a lot of jabs to control space and to keep your opponents off of you. However, you have the problem of not being able to cancel into pierce from that and starting a fast break. So what you can do instead, when it comes to using your 5P jab or using any other move, is instead of canceling into pierce, cancel into oppose instead. If your opponent recognizes that you're trying to cancel into something that you shouldn't, they might try to interrupt. And if they make contact with your oppose, you have the option of just running up and command grabbing them, or covering yourself after with a far slash and then canceling the oppose into drunkard shade to get the same exact sandwich setup that we just talked about. Here you're starting to see the pattern of Zato. While he has infinite possibilities, his moveset and his kit is connected through these very key moments or exchanges. And that's why in this situation you see that although you can't go into your drive, you can skip straight to the sandwich pressure. If you are still having trouble getting your opponent to respect your drive, one thing that you can do is sometimes is to add a gap between your far slash and your heavy slash, so that it counter hits your opponent who's mashing without thinking. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about what I like to call post-drive skills. Basically, what do you do after you finish your drive and you didn't get a chance to open up your opponent? Here it's very important to understand the situation or the game state that you're in, as you got your opponent in the corner, but you no longer have Eddie meter to. Your job in this situation is to do everything in your power to not let your opponent out the corner and to buy time for Eddie to come back. So this is when you use Zato's extended range on his normals to control that space by backing up a little bit and making sure that they can't get past you without it overextending themselves. This puts the pressure on your opponent to find a way out, because if they wait until Eddie comes back, there's a small chance that they'll be able to survive another mix-up from you. If you're a Zato player that doesn't believe in their post-drive skills or ability to control that corner situation, if you have the meter, you can forget that situation or forego it altogether by using Zato's Sword Super. Zato's Sword Super restarts the Eddie gauge, which allows you to start your pressure over as if the Eddie gauge never ran out. Now that we talked about the drive game and what to do post-drive game, let's switch gears and talk about hard knockdowns with Zato. Hard knockdowns with Zato are extremely valuable and strong because that allows you to skip the drive phase and go straight into your strongest Zato Eddie mix-ups. What makes this so strong is that you get to do more mix because you don't have to waste Eddie meter initiating the drive. You can just go straight into it. So this allows Zato to mix harder because of the fact that he has more Eddie gauge to work with, getting more actions. This is a very powerful position for Zato to be in because he can basically dictate what side of the screen he wants to be on in regards to his opponent, and he also can set them up in any situation that will negate any option if the Zato thinks about it correctly. What I mean by that is that Zato can bait DPs, overdrives, yellow Roman cancels, and burst. On top of that, he also has some mix-ups that are just flat out unfair in these situations if the opponent hasn't seen them before. While Oki may seem complicated at first, the best part about it is that you don't have to use all of it. You can just pick and choose what you want, and when you're ready to learn a new piece of Oki, you can learn it and then start using it in your matches also. One of the last things I wanted to talk about today were two very common missed opportunities that a lot of players might miss if they don't know about or just haven't gotten that far about yet, that could really help bring everything together for them. The first one I want to talk about are anti-airs leading into straight Okizeme or straight into a 50-50 situation. So anytime you land a counter hit anti-air, all you have to do is run up and do drills, and this beats throw. So people are mashing throw, this is going to beat that. This is also going to beat people that are trying to spam a DP in that situation. You can bait that. And if the person actually decides to hold the block, they go straight into a 50-50 mix that they will have to hold. One thing you do need to keep in mind is that this setup will lose to overdrive. So if there's an eventual reversal, this will lose. So make sure that if you're going to go for this, that you bait it by just landing and blocking. The next missed opportunity that I see pretty often is that after Zato lands a regular grab, that's also an opportunity for you to be able to run up and properly space drills. If you space your drills properly, you won't get grabbed by your opponent spamming it. But on top of that, if you think that your opponent is going to DP, or you aren't really that good at spacing drills to beat DP and beat grab, what you can do is run up and use oppose instead, and then be able to start your pressure that way. I bring up these two opportunities so that you can look at your own matches and recognize whenever you're leaving an opportunity on the table. So you should never be running away from your opponent after you've thrown them, and you should never be running away from your opponent after you've successfully anti-aired them. So in this part of the video, I'm going to show you guys step by step how to perform some of the main fundamentals of Zato that I do using a PS5 controller and default controls. The trend is that when I want to negative edge on my controller, what I do is the button that I last used, I of course hold it down, but the move that I actually want to come out, I then quickly slide my thumb over to the next button. So sliding it makes it so that I don't actually release the button that I initially started with. The first thing you may notice is, well, hey, there's no way I can hold and press everything independently. And the answer to that is that you don't have to actually. With the Zato, you'll realize that there's another trend. In most cases, you're only either going to do 1 to 2 buttons with Zato before you want Eddie to do something anyways. So now when Eddie is doing something, you're free to let go of anything you want and reset your hands into a comfortable position. Because Eddie is already doing something, he won't stop to do something else now. Another issue people might think may stop them from playing Zato on default controls is that, well, Straw Hat, I can't reach this button without pressing another one in between it. So the answer to that is to just press all of them. Because Zato doesn't even have, he can't Gatling into everything anyways, it doesn't hurt to press additional buttons as long as you don't release them. So in that case, if I'm holding slash and heavy slash already, and I'm also holding, but I want to hit punch, and it's difficult for me to reach it, I can just mash everything and just make sure my thumb comes off a punch first. For example, Zato cannot Gatling his close slash into S. So because of that, if you were to press close slash and heavy slash, hold those two things down, and then roll the bottom of your thumb to kick, nothing bad will happen to your Zato sequence because Zato couldn't do anything anyway, so Eddie would. The example you're seeing on the screen is something that you'll see me do a lot in the footage forward, which I will be doing is down kick, down dust into pierce. And I do that by pressing K and holding it down, pressing dust and holding it down, and then rolling my thumb over to punch while I'm still holding K. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start with a fast break tutorial. First, before I get into it, I want to explain why I'm choosing this fast break specifically. So in this fast break, you'll see that it has a counter hit bait using that heavy slash in there, and also ends in a way that allows you to get a overhead into a low or 2 lows, or even going into a grab. So it has a lot of freedom for any kind of mix-up you want at the end. For the most part, you can even get airborne if you choose. So like most fast breaks, this uses the heavy slash into pierce starter, followed by a heavy slash. Do not hold the heavy slash. And then you want to do down, down, heavy slash again, and hold heavy slash this time, and then roll your thumb down to the K button at the bottom. A common mistake some people make is that they might rush the dash after the pierce. So it's very important to wait until Zato finishes his snap animation before you input the dash, because otherwise Zato will not dash and you'll miss your chance to follow up Eddie. The second mistake that players can make sometimes is accidentally doing the clap cancel instead, which can be detrimental because Zato doesn't get the chance to run up behind Eddie because he's too busy clapping or snapping his fingers, I guess. A way to avoid that is by making sure that you're not pressing the K button right after moving Eddie, and that instead you're starting your negative edge a little bit earlier so that you're releasing it and not just trying to rush and press it. Next up, we have an Oki tutorial. A basic way of setting up Oki on your opponent is to use 2K into 2D, and then to cancel that into the Eddie summon, and from there you immediately hold whatever action you want Eddie to do upon the wake up of your opponent, and then you let it go. So first up, we got the Zato drill 50-50. So what you're going to do is knock your opponent down with 2K 2D, summon Eddie, and then immediately hold K. Next thing you're going to do is jump and then release K as your opponent is getting up, and you're going to then land and either go low, or as you're about to drop on them, use dust. That way you're going to get an overhead. This is going to be a very important sequence to learn, because this is also a sequence that you can get away with doing in those missed opportunities, such as a counter hit, anti-air, 6P, or getting a grab and being able to run up and doing that off the grab if that person doesn't have a DP. One thing to know about some of the 50-50 drill Oki is that it will lose to invincible reversals such as a DP. And so one thing that you can do in that situation instead is to do the same Oki setup of 2K into 2D, but instead hold heavy slash instead of kick. So that way when the opponent gets up, you can release oppose and then punish them for doing a DP. The last Oki I'm going to break down for this video is 2K into 2D. You're going to also hold K again as your opponent is getting up. Release K and immediately cancel your drills into Drunkard Shade. This is going to make it so that the first drill comes out to lock your opponent down in place, but then Eddie is going to safely get behind them for you now to go into your sandwich. One thing I would like to stress again is that this is not the end all be all of Oki at all. This was just to get the gears turning of how Oki works, and the idea of holding a button as your opponent is getting up to then start a sequence. All right, this is a great Zato Oki is probably the most fun you'll have in Guilty Gear when it comes to just coming up with new stuff and expressing yourself. So please go ahead and look into it. You'll really find some cool stuff out there. Final tips for learning how to negative edge with the controller is, when you're making a sequence, don't be afraid to just use the buttons that's adjacent to where your thumb is. There's plenty of options that comes from that alone. But if there is a unique situation where you need an action that's not close to where your thumb is, do not be afraid to press additional buttons just to make contact with that button. What matters is that you make contact and that it comes off of that button first, which it probably will because you had to reach so far to get it. Like what we were saying earlier, Zato is a character with infinite combinations and sequences, right? Because of that though, you should very much focus on why you're doing the things or the sequences that you're doing, what they're accomplishing, and not the sequence themselves. The reason why I emphasize this is because there's always an easier sequence that accomplishes the same thing. To wrap it all up, Zato is a character that deeply depends on the player's ability to connect situations back to what the player is familiar with. Just being able to connect the different pieces of Zato's game plan is what's going to allow you to really thrive and have fun with the character. I hope that this video has helped you a lot, and if it was, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. I really appreciate it, and it's helped me a lot. I hope this video has helped you also. Take care.